the second week of our series, Plastic Donuts. I want to welcome our Sapulpa, our Coweta campuses, those of you that are watching online. I'm so glad that you are joining us for this series on giving that delights the heart of God. We've been going along with the book, and I hope you picked up one by Jeff Anderson called Plastic Donuts. We've made them available at all of our campuses. I want you to just kind of read along with us as we're walking through that book. But you recall early in that book, Jeff tells the story about his young daughter playing at her little kitchen play set one day and making believe that she's cooking, and she brings a little plastic donut to her dad, to Jeff, and he acts like he's eating it, and it brought her such delight. And she kept bringing back things because she saw her father's response to that. And so Jeff says he was moved by the way that it touched his daughter's heart and his response, how it touched her heart. And so we talked about, and Jeff addresses that for us, that we give in such a way that it delights God's heart, that ought to be the motivation in our giving. And so we talked about a giving truth last week that kind of sets us up, and I want to make sure we get that before we move on, that the amount matters. That when we're talking about giving to God and giving to God in such a way that delights Him, the amount matters. Now, we're not talking about how much, we're just saying the amount matters. And we often hear that it's all about the heart. It really doesn't make any difference how much you give. It's the heart that matters. And while that is certainly a true statement that the heart matters, because the heart matters, the amount matters. Just ask any bride-to-be if the amount that was spent on a ring mattered to her. If a husband-to-be does really well but were to spend just a little bit on a ring, it would be reflective of his heart. And so the amount matters. We recognize that we're talking about the heart. So giving to God, I have to think about the amount. And what I discover is that when I give in such a way that delights the heart of God, something happens in me that I get some joy, that I get some pleasure out of giving in such a way. And the other thing that happens, it connects me with God, which is what God really wants anyway, is connecting with us. God doesn't need our money. What He really wants is us. And so I want you, as we get into this second part of it, to think about a time in which you were given a gift. I want you to think specifically about a great gift, something that was given to you, and you look back and you think, that was a thoughtful gift. That was a wonderful gift. I want you to think about it, because I'm going to have you share it with the person that's sitting next to you. Here, you got 3 seconds to think about this gift. Okay, all of our campuses, I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to tell them the best gift that you ever got. Go ahead and do that right now. Okay, if you haven't told the other person, go ahead and exchange the best gift that you've ever received. We're going to talk about, and I want you to think about why it is, what made that special of a gift. What was it that made that a special gift to you? Actually, God gives us some instructions about what makes for special gifts. We're going to look at them in Deuteronomy chapter 16. If you recall that when God set apart His people in the Old Testament, the Israelites, and He says, you're going to be my people, and I'm going to set apart, and you're going to do certain things for me. And He gave them specific commandments to set them apart, and says, you're going to be different from the people that you live around. And then He talked to them about animal sacrifices that they would make that would cover their sin temporarily. And then He talked about building a tabernacle, and there were certain ways in which they were to do that, and that certainly involved a means by which they could bring these animal sacrifices. But in Deuteronomy chapter 16, God gives them some specific holidays, festivals, if you will, to celebrate. You're familiar with them. There's the festival of the Passover, or the festival of the unleavened bread. It's the same thing. And there was the festival of the weeks, or Pentecost is what it was called. It had to do with the harvest, and was timed with the harvest. You know, the Passover was a festival that celebrated being brought out of Egypt, and the dark angel, death angel, passing over those that had been covered with the blood of the Lamb. And then the third festival was the festival of tabernacles, or Festival of Booths, and it was to remind the Israelites that God had provided for them and through the wilderness, and how they had lived in little small tents, and so all of these celebrations to bring them to God, to remind them. God said, keep these holidays, and as a part of that, God said, I want you to bring me a gift. When you come to celebrate these holidays, bring me a gift. Deuteronomy 16, when you celebrate the festival of the weeks to the Lord your God, give a free will offering in proportion to the blessings the Lord your God has given you. And so what God says is, I want you to bring something. You determine the amount of that, but it is something that you are going to do on your own. Just a couple of verses later, He's summing it all up. 3 times a year, appear before the Lord your God at the place you choose, at the place He will choose. And again, He sums up the festival of the unleavened bread. That's Passover, the festival of the weeks, the festival of the tabernacles. Listen to this. No one should appear before me empty-handed. God is expecting a gift when you come. Each of you must bring in proportion to the way the Lord your God has blessed you. Bring a gift in proportion to the way in which God has blessed you. And so from the text there in Deuteronomy chapter 16, as we see God setting apart, talking to His people, God no doubt expected an offering. I mean, it's very clear. God says, don't show up empty-handed. You're going to bring something. But the interesting thing is that God expected those bringing the offering to determine the amount, not Him. God doesn't lay out for them how much to bring, how much the tax, the tithe, their portion was going to be. He says, you determine that. It's not specified. God didn't tell His people how much. Now, it's true that the Bible in the Old Testament talks about the tithe, that His people were to give 10% of certain things. But the truth is, there is a lot more mention of this kind of undetermined amount giving that people were to freely give. There are lots more indications and times when God's people were to give a free will offering, if you will. So let's talk about giving truth number 2 that we're going to talk about today, and that is this: the giver determines the gift. The giver determines the amount. Remember last week we talked about the amount matters. And this week we're going to talk about that the giver determines what that amount is. The giver determines the gift. You determine the amount. The Bible is full of examples of people bringing gifts to God and it not being a specified gift, it being something that they gave from their heart, something that they gave that was a free will gift. In fact, when Solomon, David's son, became king of Israel, he gave a gift to God. We read about it in 1 Kings 3:4. The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 offerings on that altar. No place are we told that God determined that for him, that God said you need to do this. In fact, that's just highly unlikely. We're not even told that he was supposed to do this. This is something that Solomon just did out of gratefulness and out of worship to God. He selected the amount, 1,000 offerings that he came and presented to God and had sacrificed to God. Remember Zacchaeus? Jesus meets this person that is seeking him. Luke chapter 19. Zacchaeus, a tax collector. Zacchaeus, the one that had ripped his own people off, had sided with Rome. And yet Zacchaeus is told by Jesus, I'm coming to your house today, and salvation is going to come to your house today. And at the party that Zacchaeus is throwing, he stood up and said to the Lord, look, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay him 4 times the amount. Notice what Zacchaeus does. He decides on his own that he is going to give back half of all of his possessions to the poor. Jesus didn't specify that. Jesus didn't ask Zacchaeus to do that. Zacchaeus wasn't given an amount by Jesus to make things right. This was what Zacchaeus did out of response to the salvation that Jesus had brought to him and his household. And he voluntarily said, 50% of everything I'm going to give away. The Apostle Paul addresses the church in Corinth. They're giving, preparing to give to some other needy churches, and he says something too about it being voluntary. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. We often talk about that last phrase in services, and it gets mentioned before an offering is taken. God loves a cheerful giver. And what is beyond that? It's when you give a gift that you've decided. You don't do it out of compulsion. You don't do it because you feel forced to, because you need to, because it's what you do. You do it because it's something that you've decided, I want to do this. I voluntarily give this. It's a free will offering. It's an amount that I have determined. That's when it becomes cheerful giving. Now, just because God gives us the freedom to determine our gift doesn't mean that every gift that we give is a pleasing one. It's possible for you to choose not to give to God, and that would be God ignoring God's clear desires. I mean, God's very clear to us. Giving is not an option. If you believe in Him, then supporting His church and giving back to Him through the poor, then that is just a given. That is something that we are to do, and if you ignore that, you are going against God's desires. In the same way, to choose not to give an amount that matters to you, as we talked about last week, an amount that matters, that results in a gift that's not pleasing to God. So to choose not to give, that's not where we need to be. Even in God's graciousness, to say you determine the amount, deciding not to give or deciding to just give something that really doesn't matter, those aren't options for us. The problem is that you and I want to be told what to do. We want to be told what the expectation is for a meaningful gift. Just tell us what we need to do, God. What's the minimal requirement? Just tell me how much I need to give, and I'll do it. And so in a sense, we would prefer something like this. Now read it carefully. We're talking about an income tithe return, okay? So we're accustomed to having to fill out one of these, and while it may not be easy, it certainly kind of takes away any of the, having to make decisions. You put down the amounts and it's black and white, and sometimes we want our giving to be like that. Just make it black and white, God. We just want you to tell us what to do. Just give us the formula. And so, maybe it's a flat 10%, or maybe I've got something down here where I figure it because of my gross or because of my net, or, I get some kind of exemption or some kind of allowance or whatever. We want to figure, God, just give us the amount. Tell us what to do. That would be easier, wouldn't it? But unlike the IRS or your mortgage company, God doesn't set an amount for you. He didn't give you a formula. He didn't give you a form to fill out to determine how much you give, because giving is not a ritual. Giving is more than just an amount that you determine. Giving is a personal relationship with God. We said it last week. It's all about connecting with God. And so let me ask you, if you were God, just pretend for a minute, if you were God, remember, God doesn't need your money. But if you were God and your creation was giving back to you, would you want someone that was maybe giving their 10% or whatever their percentage was, and they were giving it to you regularly, but it was just something they did out of habit. It was just something that they did as kind of a ritual. It was just like paying a bill. Would you prefer that, or would you prefer someone that was giving as a heart matter? Someone that was giving a true free will offering. They were giving because they were grateful. They were giving out of worship. It might be a lesser amount than the tither was giving, but they are giving in such a way that they are seeking you and that they are asking you for guidance and they're trusting you with a provision. It's not ritual at all. It's something where they are talking to you and seeking your face in their gifts. I think all of us would admit that that's exactly what we would want. We want the relationship, and that's exactly what God wants. He wants us in and through our giving to connect with Him. The New Testament tells us about one of those special gifts. One of those gifts that was certainly not just set, it was not determined, it was not even expected. We find it in John chapter 12. It is just days before Jesus is going to be crucified. He's in a place called Bethany, and well, just read along with me. Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. We remember reading all of that. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. One of the other gospel tells us it was at Simon the leper's house. Simon the leper whom Jesus had healed from leprosy. Martha served. Remember, Martha is Lazarus' sister, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. And so they're having this dinner. Everything's going fine. Some of Jesus' friends are there. Certainly Lazarus, his sister Martha. Also Simon, this man that Jesus had healed. Verse 3, though, this dinner is going to take a definite change. Then Mary. Now, Mary is another sister of Lazarus. You may remember a story of Mary and Martha. Martha was the one that was doing all the fixing and serving, and Mary was the one sitting at Jesus' feet. In the midst of this little dinner, Mary took about a pint of pure nard. We're told it was basically myrrh, very aromatic perfume, an expensive perfume. And she poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. Of all the thing, pouring this all over Jesus. In fact, some of the other gospels say that she poured it and it started from his head and went all the way down to his feet. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. I can just imagine. I mean, this is a costly perfume. This is a very smelly perfume. Everybody in the house would have known what was going on, would have witnessed this thing. And yet we see what an amazing response. I mean, Jesus at this meal, a person that he'd healed from leprosy, Lazarus reclining there, and Jesus had raised him from the dead. And what does Mary do? She just gives this lavish gift. She was so grateful for what Jesus had done. She just gave lavishly. And you know, this was a special gift. It was a gift that was special, and we would certainly look at it and go, well, it was expensive. It was an expensive gift. But it went way beyond the expense of that. It was costly, but there was more to it than that. In fact, because of the expense of this, the disciples say, you know, we're told that it was Judas that kind of ramrodded this thing. Wait a minute, we should have given this to the poor. And we find out really Judas wanted to just sift some of the money off. He wasn't really concerned about the poor. Maybe the other disciples were, but we find out that the disciples even questioned this gift being given. In fact, they're basically, don't you know the rules, lady? That's not how you do it. Why don't you just give your 10%? The Lord takes cash. He takes small lambs. He takes certain produce. You know, that's the way we do this thing. But Mary chose to just do this lavishly. It reminds me about some things that make gifts special. Giving that matters. That's what we're talking about. You and I giving and determining an amount in our giving that really matters. And we find out that giving that matters is unsolicited. That perfume is not something Jesus expected or Jesus asked for. It was just something that Mary chose out of the fullness of her heart and the gratefulness of her heart to give him. You know, that we love gifts like that. That we weren't expecting. We had no idea. When we give Christmas gifts at our house, often we're asking our kids and our family, what do you want? And they give us Christmas lists. And I love to get things that are on my Christmas gift. I like to get things that I've asked for. But I really love getting something from someone that someone just gives. That I had no idea. I would have never imagined, and there it is, this unsolicited gift that I can enjoy. Giving that matters, unsolicited. And number two, giving that matters is personal. Well, you don't get much more personal than this kind of gift right here. Jesus being anointed with perfume. I mean, Jesus getting this amazing thing. That's what personal gifts are. They're thoughtful. They are thought through. They are things that somebody has given consideration to. They reflect the person that you give it to. They say, you were listening to me. You heard me say something a week ago or months ago, and you were listening, you were paying attention. In fact, I suspect when you were talking about maybe the gifts that you really appreciated from somebody early in this message, that had something to do with it. Somebody paid attention. Someone knew you better than you thought they did. In fact, that's exactly what's taking place with this particular deal. Is this gift was the appropriate, yeah, it was costly, but it was also an appropriate gift for a burial. And Jesus is going to die in just a few days. He had clearly predicted to his followers a half a dozen times that he would die. He had more than that alluded to the fact that he was going to die. And the disciples have missed it completely, but evidently a girl named Mary was listening, and she gives a gift that is fitting, representing what Jesus really needs. Giving that matters is unsolicited, it's personal, and it's also sacrificial. There's no doubt this was a sacrificial gift. We're told in the Gospel of Mark that it was worth a year's wages. Maybe we could estimate a $50,000 price tag in our day, in our money, that would have been the cost of this expensive perfume that Mary just wasted on Jesus, just poured out on Jesus. Costly, sacrificial. And you know what? Sacrifice brings honor to God. Doesn't make any difference whether you're a millionaire, a 14-year-old, a single mom with kids, a married couple. When you give gifts that represent sacrifice, that are costly, it does something in you, and it brings delight to the heart of God. So before we wrap it up, let's maybe just ask ourselves some questions going back to those kinds of gifts. One of those that we all need to ask is, do I thoughtfully consider what I give to God? Do I thoughtfully consider what I give to God? Or has my giving just become routine? Has it been just something that I do? I put it in the offering plate each week. I write my check. I pull out some money. I pay it online. I like a bill. Has it become routine? You know how gifts can be like that, just routine. The old Father's Day tie, it's nothing exciting. The dad just expects it every time. Do I thoughtfully consider what I give to God? Another question that might be a good one for you to ask is my giving personal? Is my giving personal? Is it yours? Have you thought through it and have you decided that? Is it something that you're doing out of your own heart? Is it your free will? Is it what you want to do? Maybe you've been giving a percentage of your income for a long, long time, and it's no longer yours. It's what your church told you was the standard 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. Is your giving a personal gift to God, or is it just a form that you filled out and something that you have done to fit in? And lastly, does my giving cost me something? Is there some sacrifice in that? Because I think often giving to the offering, giving to your church, giving to God, it becomes just something that is more like a tip. It's something that I throw a $20 bill in. I throw something in just to say that I participated. And so maybe one of the things that we need to ask is that a gift that truly expresses your gratefulness to God? When it comes to giving to other people, I'm not a great gift giver. But I happened onto the perfect gift to give my wife back a few years ago. I was always stressed out about that. What do I give her? And I have to think about it. And if you're a guy, you know what I'm talking about. That's just something, it comes along, and so you've got, well, what do I do? Whether it's Christmas or some other special day. And so I happened upon one of those charm bracelets, and I'd heard my wife talk about it, and she'd mentioned it when a commercial came on, and I thought, this is it, I am going to do it. And it became the perfect gift for me for quite a while. I gave it for Christmas. I gave a charm for Valentine's. When birthday came along, other kinds of special occasion, there I was. Man, the people at the charm store, they loved me. Man, I was feeding the system, and it was a good deal. And so I thought I had the perfect, and I'm not going to have to worry about this, and that's just what I kept doing. But I realized that even that can get old. So this last Christmas, I'm thinking, I can't just keep getting something else. I'd gotten her something that represented all of our kids. And when our grandson Noah was born, I got a little pacifier that represented that. And so I had kind of filled that thing up with all kinds. And I'm like, what do I do? And I realized that on this bracelet that she had something that represented the kids and something that represented, our grandson. And I'm like, there's nothing there that represents her. And so I thought, what is that? What is it that she likes? What is it that she would appreciate? My wife, if you've ever been to her house, you know she loves fleur-de-lis pattern. She loves that look. She loves that picture, that logo. For those of you that don't have any culture, don't know what I'm talking about, just think New Orleans Saints, okay? That's the picture right there. Fleur-de-lis, I had to learn that too. And so I thought, that's exactly it. I wonder if I can find one. And sure enough, I was able to track one of those down. And I gave it to her last Christmas. And I asked her this week, I said, baby, what's the best gift that I've ever given? She said, that's the one right there. She goes, because this is what you told me. I knew that you knew I liked that, but this is what you told me when you gave it to me. You said, I know that on your charm bracelet, you've got something that represents all of our kids. And I know you've got something on your charm bracelet that represents, having a grandson. And I said this evidently to her. She goes, then you said, I wanted you to have something that represents you. Oh, big points. I scored big points on that one right there. Just a little charm, but a special gift. So here's what I want you to think about. In your giving, maybe it's become routine, maybe it's become ritual for you, maybe this is something new that you're considering. And I want you to think about some of the questions. Do you thoughtfully consider what you give to God? Is my giving personal? Does my giving cost me something? But does your giving represent the God that you're giving it to? Father, we thank you for giving so much to us, for being so gracious, so generous, so loving. And God, would you help us as we consider how we give in such a way that delights you. God, forgive us when we've given habitually, ritually, when we've just given something that's not been heartfelt. Father, when we've given something that really hasn't cost us anything. Help us, God, to give in such a way that you are represented well. In Jesus' name.